even like 15 years ago, when I was, or 20 years ago, or in high school, when I was looking for certain information, I'd have to
Yep.
go to like a library and take out a
Right.
book, a nutrition book, because that information, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have access to nutrient databases, et cetera,
Yep.
and you had to dig that stuff up. So I do think, about being the right place at the right time. Yeah, I mean, just even from an economic standpoint, I mean, there's, a genetic test was $1 million, like a full
Right.
genome sequence, just like 10 years ago. And now I just had a full genetic sequence done last winter
Okay.
for like $200.
Very cool. Yeah.
Like
I've,
full, not
I,
23andMe, like full sequence, like full
yeah,
terabytes of data. Yeah.
it's super cool. I have a DNA kit on its way right now, actually, because I haven't had one done before. So I'm looking forward to kind of diving into that genetic, sequence and finding out a little bit more about my DNA. And it's just incredible that it's so accessible and so affordable now compared to, like you said, when it first came out years ago. It was so much more expensive and not as accessible for your average person like us. Very cool. So that being said, and this is probably a little bit more of a broad question, but hopefully you can kind of narrow in on some specifics here. What are some of the things that you like to focus on when it comes to self-quantification and measuring your body? Is it sleep? Is it nutrition, fitness? Like, what are some of the big things that you really enjoy the most?
Sure. I mean, you got to think of it in terms of layers. So you have this sort of always on kind of passive tracking. So if you wear any kind of wearable, like I've got an Aura ring on, I've got a BioStrap on, for example, like that's tracking your general daily activity, things like steps or movement, sleep, heart rate variability. And even if I'm not looking at that data, it's collecting. So I can go back over time. I can look at something from years ago and just be like, oh, what happened during that period? So that doesn't require a whole lot of effort on your part. So that's like a very easy win. I have a wireless body composition scale, so like tracking that every day, because there's an accuracy plus minus with it every day. I'm not losing 2% body fat every day, but if you just look at the trend, it's going to be pretty accurate. With regards to uh, other markers like HRV, you can track it like overnight. Some of these devices do it, but I like to take it first thing in the morning before I even get out of bed. I get a reading, like a true reading, and that's a good sign for you trend that to see. You probably talked about this before with like things like recovery, or did I train hard yesterday? Did someone go out? If I went out the night before too late or something like that, it's a recovery day. Um, if your baseline kind of, that's, when you talk about layers, you've got that kind of aspect. And on top of that, you might be doing things like glucose monitoring. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
be tracking glucose or ketones. I don't need to do it every day.
Yep.
I've worn I've done finger stick glucose checks and ketones. I've done it with trying it with different foods or fasting. But then
Mm-hmm.
I went and got there's continuous glucose monitors now that you wear it. It goes on the back of your arm and has a tiny needle that goes into the skin,
Mm-hmm.
and it's passively collecting glucose data 24/7 for 2 weeks. And then it's a disposable sensor. And now you've got a lot more data points, but you can also see things like what happens while you're sleeping or exercising, or so that's something that again requires a little more effort. And I might do that, every quarter or so, if I've got certain experiments for that. Other things, you can be like we talked about genetics and DNA.
Mm-hmm.
More or less, you just have to do that once, right? Your DNA isn't changing,
Right.
but now there's another layer called epigenetic testing. So that's a nice to have, where you're going to see the effects of the environment on your body. So it's like you can change gene expression. So
Mm-hmm.
knowing that like you've got a fast twitch or sprinter gene or whatever, that's going to show up in any genetic test you do. But there's other markers that are showing, when they talk about your biological age versus your chronological age, and they're coming up
Yep.
with these markers to see, your tissues are aging at different rates, et cetera. That's a nice to have. Things like gut testing, microbiome testing,
Yep.
that you do more frequently, because that's always changing. But, I think for a lot of people, they dive into some of that, and it's just way more information than they can even. It just, because it's still kind of like a new area, and so even those tests are trying to really focus it down to things like diet, in terms of which foods not just cause inflammation or something like that in your body, but it might be like which things keep you the most metabolically at a good place from the standpoint
Mm-hmm.
of glucose levels and things
Sure.
like that. There's all sorts of lab tests. We can talk all day about that, and that just
Sure.
comes down to like, what are you trying to, it's good to get once, let's say even someone gets one full workup of blood testing a year, you might want a few more data points than that. There might be other things that, at certain times you'll want to dive in on. It just depends on what your goals are. I think it's the first thing people want to do is understand themselves at a baseline level, and then start layering on top of that or focusing on areas. I think some people they worry about something in some specific area, and it's not even like a huge issue. They fix some other things in another area that will work itself out.
Sure.
You got other kind of markers like things like blood pressure, body temperature. I think we can dive into like a lot of like, especially with what's going on with COVID and all that. I had always been checking things like blood oxygen saturations is another marker that's important. So I've had a pulse oximeter for a number of years. I've done to do a lot of breath work and other training that incorporates high and low oxygen. So I was, kind of paying attention to that and body temperature and some sleep data, because when we were talking about, people predicting illness, there were some key markers in there that, were showing like, look, you can see some of this, not necessarily COVID, it could even be the flu. Like you can see it a few days coming on.
Yep.
Versus, with technology, we can talk all about, there's all sorts of toys and cool things you can be measuring that just you have the money for, and it might be a cool insight for yourself, but it's not an everyday thing. Like I think when you said earlier, like I tracked everything, I was like, well, I have tracked a lot of things. Doesn't mean I'm always tracking everything. I mean, some of this has been built on to be more passive. Like the air quality in my home is being tracked 24/7. So I set it up. I don't have to do anything. Again, it's passive. But if I want to go do an experiment, I can say, okay, well, I can take those data points, stack them with sleep data, and stack them with other things, and see like what happened there. Maybe they just have an effect on something else. So, and then with exercise and training, that's more just tracking workouts. For me, I've got notebooks going back 25, 30 years. I mean, I literally have stuff written down, old workouts. It's cool to go back and look at. I think when we talk about diet and nutrition, I mean, things like, keeping a meal diary, looking at that. I'll use a more comprehensive tool like a MyFitnessPal or something to just get like 3 or 4 days worth of data. Maybe like once or twice a year, I'm pretty dialed in with what I eat, just to make sure I'm hitting certain macros and at the high level. But day to day, I'm not as worried about counting calories. I mean, if you're eating a certain way and you kind of stay with that program, your body, I just know for me, for example, it'll regulate pretty well. I actually built a meal tracking app about a year ago that it's just focused around photos, because I realized like really what's important is just seeing like the timing, especially if you're trying to eat in the eating window. All the information is in the photo, so you don't have to like count calorie. For me, I'll do a gut check like that once or twice a year, but other than that, it's more about behavior, seeing trends. Like, are you always going for that extra cup of coffee at 4 p.m, or are you eating these late meals? Well, you had this, you had some gluten-free pizza at like 9 p.m. last night, and look at your sleep, it got wrecked. Or you worked out when you had a bad workout and you realized, well, you didn't fuel it properly that day. So
that's cool.
You can look at all sorts of different areas there, and there's all new things coming out every day, it seems, with new ways to measure all sorts of aspects of your body and your mind. We can talk about using EEG to measure brain activity and understand the effects, like people are using tools like neurofeedback to sort of correct deficiencies there, or use that data, or use that to guide things like meditation, for example.